All right, everybody, welcome back to Horn Takes Podcast. I'm your host, Sean Redfern. Got a cool show today. We got 29 days until football season for the Texas Longhorns. 4 more Saturdays. Before we get into it, check us out on Twitter, at Horn Takes, TikTok, at Horn Takes, YouTube, at Horn Takes. So far, I haven't seen anybody else with Horn Takes in their name. So if you search for Horn Takes, you should be good. Let's get you caught up on recruiting. Not a whole lot of news going on. No commits since the last show. We haven't lost any commits since the last show either, so I guess that's positive. Few big names that are out there right now. Some news on these guys. Brandon Baker, we've been talking about him for the last couple weeks. 5-star. Offensive tackle out of Mater D out in California. This guy is the last uncommitted blue chip type offensive tackle. For a long time, people thought it was a Texas-Oregon battle with a slight lean towards Texas. And I think most people think that's still the case, but big Brandon Baker's going on an official visit to Nebraska in September, I believe September 16th. So no decision imminent for Brandon Baker. He's going to take his time, it looks like. We talked on the show last week about how the Pac-10 kind of looking like it might be crumbling, how that might affect his decision. And I think Nebraska's probably taking that opportunity to get up in the mix. Colin Simmons, big 5-star edge out of Duncanville, number 1 edge in the country. Colin Simmons comes to a pretty big recruiting weekend in June at the University of Texas. Has a great trip, great visit. Family enjoyed it. He did go on a unofficial to LSU last weekend. And by all accounts, he had a good time. And so because of that, nobody knows what Colin Simmons is doing. A lot of Texas fans Texas people close to the Texas program think that Colin Simmons is a Longhorn. A lot of people, and these are fans, think that Colin Simmons has probably been a silent commit since June. I don't know about that. But you talk to the LSU folks, the people that are close to the LSU program, they're confident as well. In fact, there's crystal balls for Texas, and there's crystal balls for LSU. He's keeping it really close to the vest. Miami's the third team that's sort of in the mix, or has been in the mix for Colin Simmons. I don't think they're in the mix anymore. I definitely feel like this is an LSU-Texas battle from here on out. But the folks at Miami feel like Texas is the team to beat as well. What that means, I have no idea. The good news is, apparently we don't have to wait too much longer. We talked on the show last week about there being a lot of sort of rumor that he was going to bump up his timeline. Originally, Colin Simmons was not committing until December. Looks like now, at least for today, at least for the last couple days, 2 p.m. Central, August 10th, next Thursday, Colin Simmons is going to announce where he's going to college. And again, it looks like a LSU-Texas battle. I don't think a lot of people have a good read on this one. I think earlier this year, he was an LSU lean. He got fonged to LSU, and Whitfong is not backed off of that. He's kept that crystal ball in effect. I don't know. We'll see what happens. A lot of people are making a big deal about, trying to build a correlation between the fact that he was just at LSU and now he's he's going to go ahead and commit. He's bumped his timeline up really substantially. But there was already a lot of talk about that, and it just so happens that August 10th is their media day there at Duncanville. His teammate, Caden Durham, is basically a lock for LSU. He's also announcing on the 10th, which adds more to the sort of thought by some that this is an LSU deal. I don't know. You hear Colin Simmons tell it, business school is very important to him. He wants to get into commercial real estate. There's not even a conversation about, I don't even know what the business school is at LSU, but it's not as good as the Macomb School of Business at the University of Texas. So if that's really important to him, I don't know. You never know what goes through these kids' heads. But there it is. Colin Simmons is going to announce 2 p.m. Central. It's going to be streamed on On3 August 10th. That's next Thursday. Ryan Wingo, another guy, 5-star wide receiver out of St. Louis, Missouri. He's been on several trips. Not a lot of buzz about him since that recruiting weekend. Don't know if that's good. Don't know if that's bad. Kobe Black, 5-star cornerback out of Waco, has canceled his visit to Alabama. He's likely taking no more trips, except apparently he wants to get on campus for a game at the University of Texas. Says Texas feels like family. I think at this point, for Kobe Black, it seems like he's leaning towards Texas. Dominic McKinley's a guy that we haven't talked about much since that recruiting weekend because there just hasn't been a whole lot of news about him. Dominic McKinley is a 5-star defensive lineman out of Lafayette, Louisiana. Recently visited LSU. He's a guy that holds offers from obviously all over the country. One of the best defensive tackles in the country. But there's starting to be some news trickle out about him possibly announcing before the season starts. And a lot of that news favors Texas. Sources close to LSU in Texas, according to Hudson Standish from Horns 247. Sources close to LSU in Texas feel like this is a Texas deal. Hank South of Horns 247 recently had a discussion with Dominic McKinley's mother, or at least heard quotes from Dominic McKinley's mother that September 1st he will be announcing. And Hank South went ahead and put in a crystal ball for Dominic McKinley today. So I think, man, if Texas could land Dominic McKinley, Kobe Black, Ryan Wingo, and Colin Simmons, that puts a really big shine on this recruiting class. It's not bad. It's tracking really well. It'll be today it will be probably a top 15. I'll tell you what it is today. Right now it's ranked 22nd with 15 commits. I figure they're probably taking between 7 and 10 more guys. And they'll find guys. And they'll flip some guys late. But man, you land those 3 or 4 5-stars, and all of a sudden this class is top 5 written all over it. And that's where you got to be. And again, we've talked about this so many times. You're not just recruiting for stars. You're not just recruiting for where that recruiting class ranks. You're looking at what those classes are made up of. And these classes so far have just been absolutely loaded with defensive linemen, offensive linemen. As you head into the SEC, you got to have really good offensive lines. You got to have really good defensive lines. I think Texas is building that. 2025 class, recruiting for that has kicked off hot and heavy here in the last week or so. 4 crystal balls already for 2025 guys. Tyler Thomas, offensive tackle out of Dickinson, Texas. He's unranked currently, holds a lot of offers. Running back Jordan Davison of Mater D. He was one of the guys that was in town early last week. Has been multiple times to Texas. He's got a crystal ball. He's the number one the number one running back in the country as of right now, according to 247 Sports. Cornerback Caleb Chester from Fort Bend Marshall, another guy that holds a lot of offers but is currently unranked. I don't know when they get hot and heavy on the next class rankings. I know there's still a couple of rankings that'll be readjusted for the 2024 class. So I don't know really when they start getting super serious about the 2025s. I imagine when the 2024s are done, that last year that these kids are in school, I think that's probably when you see them get super detailed with those guys. Another guy, Landon Rink from Cy-Fair, Texas. He's a 4-star defensive lineman. Texas legacy. And then a bonus 2026 guy, Javion Osborne, running back out of Forney, Texas, has a crystal ball to Texas. So there's 5 underclassmen that have been on visits. Apparently those visits went so well that the insiders feel like they're going to be Texas's to lose. Been breaking down position groups all summer long as we approach college football. Man, I'm excited. About a month to go, man. Actually, 3 weeks to go until some sort of college football comes on. A month to go for most teams. So we've been breaking down all the position groups. Today we're going to talk about the linebackers. Linebacker is a position of concern. Linebacker has been a position of concern for me anyway, for a while. Last 2 or 3 seasons. We've seen, before Steve Sarkisian got here, and even the first season Steve Sarkisian was here with his staff, we saw some really bad linebacker play. We saw a lot of talented guys come into the program and leave the program and be with the program. We just didn't see a lot of good results coming out of those really talented guys. What's up, old man Nate? I think this position group is really long on talent, but it is really, really short on experience. So what Texas fans have to bet on at this point is that PK and Coach Choate have developed the next star linebacker at the University of Texas, and maybe in the process of developing the next stars, plural, at the University of Texas. This group is obviously anchored by middle linebacker Jalen Ford. Had an outstanding season in 2022. Probably should have been the Big 12 Player of the Year for defense. I know Coach Sark says that every time he gets an opportunity. I think most Texas fans will tell you that they feel like Jalen Ford had a better season than the guy out of Kansas State that actually won the award. I don't know. That guy got drafted in the first round, so he's a pretty damn good football player apparently. But I mean, if you look at just numbers, Jalen Ford would have been a hard candidate to say that is not the defensive player of the year in the Big 12. Regardless, he sort of flirted with the NFL a little bit. Should he go? Should he stay? I guess he got news that wasn't news he necessarily wanted to hear, and he came back to the University of Texas, and that's huge. He's a preseason all Big 12 guy. He's a preseason Big 12 Defensive Player of the Year. He's on the Bronco Nagurski watch list. This is a guy that if he puts another really solid year together like he did last season, he can be an All-American. That's the type of talent Jalen Ford has. And it wasn't always like that. He wasn't always performing that way. He was one of those linebackers that was on campus that had talent, but just for whatever reason, wasn't working out. Boy, did they develop him. He had his growing pains in 2021, and then 2022, just an outstanding season. So I think we're all looking ahead for Jalen Ford and expecting him to have another really good season. Now, will it be what he did last year? Who knows? We're very thin at middle linebacker after that. You look at senior Jet Bush, who's been a guy that is, again, been on campus a while, talented, shown some flashes, but generally speaking, hasn't played well. That's your backup. And then behind them, you've got 2 freshmen, Leona LaFau, and these are true freshmen. Darian Gillette. Really, really physically talented guys, but there's more to playing linebacker than that, right? Got to be in the right spot at the right time. Coverage. Just a big step up for linebackers when they come out of high school, go into college. It's a lot like playing offensive line, making that jump from high school to college. It's not an easy jump, mentally or physically. So we're really thin at middle linebacker, although we have our starter back. It's sort of the other linebacker position, and this all depends. They'll sometimes run 2 linebackers, sometimes 3, mostly 2. So what you would call the outside linebacker position was held down by DeMarvion Overshown for so long. Agent Zero, 3rd-round draft pick by the Dallas Cowboys, who is doing a really good job in camp, by all reports, by all accounts. So they got to find somebody to replace him. I think a lot of fans were hoping it would be Ant Hill, number 1 linebacker in the country last year, who was a late flip from A&M to Texas. His coach says he doesn't know what he's doing right now, very candidly. In sort of the the pressers they had the day before camp opened for the players. Ant Hill doesn't know what he's doing out there, but he shows flashes. So right now it's looking like redshirt senior David Benda has got that position kind of, I wouldn't say lockdown, but he seems to be the name that keeps coming up more often than not when you talk about who's going to replace Overshown. And then again, we're very thin after that. Junior Mo Blackwell, who's a special teams machine by all accounts. Lots of speed, lots of thump. And then you got 2 true freshmen, Ant Hill and Samaje Burrell. And I haven't heard a single word about Samaje Burrell since he got on campus. So I don't know if 8 guys is like normal for linebackers, but that seems like a really light bunch for me. Seems like there's not a lot of guys there, and there's really not a lot of experience. So again, ton of talent. I think there's some guys that they can put out on the field that are going to be able to run around, figure out ways to make plays, find the ball, make plays. But the problem is you got to have guys that know where they're supposed to be, because when guys don't know where they're supposed to be, big plays happen. So the linebacker group, again, lots of question marks. I think the biggest question is who can step up. Who's going to step up and take that outside linebacker position? And who are going to be the guys that step up and the coaches can rely on to play in that rotation? Because ideally, you just don't want to throw 2 guys out there and say, hey, guess what? You guys are playing linebacker all day long in Big 12 football. It ain't going to happen. And I think the other question, or another question, is, have PK and Choate done enough to develop some of these guys behind them the way they developed Jalen Ford over the course of the last 2 years? Is there some guys that are going to surprise the hell out of? I mean, I don't think anybody thought Jalen Ford was going to go out and have the year he had last year. I think going into last season, everybody was like, man, we talked about Overshown. Everybody knew how talented Overshown was, but I think a lot of people were like, Jalen Ford's going to – I think a lot of people were talking about Jalen Ford the way we're kind of talking about Mo Black, David Benda, Jet Bush. They're guys that have been around that just haven't really stepped up and done anything. And then can they stay healthy? Again, 8 guys, I don't know. 8 guys to play 2 or 3 positions at linebacker, that does not sound like a lot. I don't know what a typical roster looks like as far as linebacker goes on an 85 scholarship limit. It seems light to me. I expect Jalen Ford to have a great year. I expect somebody to step up. I expect Ant Hill is probably going to come in a lot on third downs. He's gonna blitz a lot. He's gonna come off the edge a lot. I think it'll be exciting to watch him and see how he develops, see what his role develops into as the season progresses. Week 6 opponent breakdown, Oklahoma Sooners. Red River shootout. Coming off a 49-0 victory over the Sooners last year in 2022. Just a pretty solid ass whooping. Nice country ass kicking. Similar to some ones that the Sooners have put on Texas in the early 2000s, to be perfectly honest. It was that kind of dominating performance. I think it's a big game in Week 6 for both teams. I think you look at Texas. I think most people think Texas is at the very least going to be a one-loss team. Like at the worst, they'll be a one-loss team headed into this game. I think that's the expectation. I think that's what most people believe. A lot of people think they're going to be a no-loss team. I think it's possible. We'll see. We'll see week 2. But it's an opportunity for Texas to start a streak against Oklahoma. In the Mac Brown era, there was a lot of streaks for Oklahoma against Texas. A lot of long streaks that sucked to be a Texas fan. It's an opportunity for Brent Venables and the Oklahoma Sooners to kind of take a step forward in their program's trajectory. Last season sucked for them. I think a lot of people thought it was going to be pretty rough. I don't think anybody thought it was going to be as rough as it actually turned out. It's been a long time since an Oklahoma team has been 6-7. And that's got to be John Blake era before Stoops took over is the last time Oklahoma had a losing season, I'm pretty sure. And then from a Texas perspective and maybe an Oklahoma perspective, there's a lot of Big 12 title implications. This game has been historically, you look at the Big 12 since the very beginning, the Texas OU game has kind of been, for a long time, it was the game that decided who was going to represent the South Division in the Big 12 championship game. You lost that game and you were kind of out. Sometimes you could backdoor your way in, but generally speaking, the winner of that game in the Big 12 championship game is a rep from the South. They don't do it like that anymore, but I still feel like for Texas, this is an opportunity to jump on top of the Big 12 in a year where they've got the roster, they've got the coaching continuity. This should be a year that they can go win some games, wind up in the Big 12 championship game, and honestly, they should win the Big 12 this season. I think a lot of Texas fans have said that a lot over the last 12 years. That Texas should go win the Big 12 this year, and they just haven't done it. But I think even for Oklahoma, this could be a game. This could be like we said, this could be a hump game for them just to get the program headed in the right direction or just prove that they're back headed in the right direction. Because I think right now a lot of people really question where Oklahoma's program is. I mean, they're recruiting pretty well this class. Venables has done a really good job of getting some quality recruits to at least commit. That none of them have signed yet, but that was a rough season. Again, 6-7 last year, 3-6 in the Big 12. Returning 12 guys off of that team, 5 on offense, 7 on defense. Key returns on offense. Obviously, you got Dylan Gabriel, who threw for 3,100 yards, 25 touchdowns. 6 interceptions last year, and he was hurt for a while. He was hurt in that game against Texas. I mean, Oklahoma was basically quarterbackless, and certainly their coaching staff was not willing to let the quarterbacks throw a whole lot in that game. And I don't think that's an excuse for Oklahoma. I mean, I feel like even if Dylan Gabriel plays in that game, Texas still wins that game by a couple scores. But he wasn't in that game. He could be back in this game. Who knows what will happen between opening day and the Red River shootout, but he's a projected guy, and Dylan Gabriel's a good quarterback. He's got Drake Stoops and Jalil Farouk coming back. 76 receptions, 1,000 yards, roughly 8 touchdowns combined for those two guys. So pretty good production coming back from a wide receiver perspective. They got a couple of their offensive linemen that played a whole lot last season coming back. You got guard Matower, Andrew Rame, over 700 snaps each for those guys. So I don't know if those guys started a whole lot, but they played absolutely a whole lot. Key returns on defense. 4 guys back coming on the D-line, 35 tackles for loss, 14 sacks between those guys. Linebacker Danny Stutzman, 125 tackles, 3 sacks, 2 interceptions. And then you got 3 DBs coming back, led by Billy Bowman, 60 tackles, 3 interceptions, 5 passes broken up. Forced fumble and a fumble return. Key losses on offense. They are losing some guys, losing some dogs, really. Eric Gray rushed for 1,300 yards last year and 11 touchdowns. He's gone. Wide receivers, Marvin Mims and Braden Willis are gone. That's 13 touchdowns and roughly 1,400 yards of production out the door. And then a couple guys on the offensive line. We talk all the time about the offensive line being way more important than people give it credit for. One of the advantages Texas has coming into the season is all 5 of those guys that started last year are back. That generally doesn't happen. And it won't happen for Oklahoma. Key losses on defense. Jalen Redmond, defensive lineman, 4 sacks. I'm going to butcher this name, but linebacker David Ugwogbu, that's probably not even close to right, but that cat had 109 tackles, 2 sacks last season, and then defensive back Justin Broyles. So not a disaster for Oklahoma in terms of who they bring back. I think the defense, there's going to have to be a lot of new bodies. On the offense, there's going to have to be a lot of new bodies that show up and prove they can play. The defense is in a little bit better shape. Predictions for this game, I do not think this is going to be a shutout. I think as long as Dylan Gabriel's healthy, I think Oklahoma will find a way to score some points. And I certainly don't expect a blowout any other way, whether it's Oklahoma that wins this game or Texas that wins this game. Again, I think OU is going to be better on offense. They're not going to have to line a tight end up in the backfield and run the Wildcat the whole game, more than likely. I think you look at keys to this game. Can OU protect Dylan Gabriel? Losing some guys on that offensive line. It's not terribly early in the season, but I guess about halfway through the season. So, can they get some guys that can gel, protect Dylan Gabriel, make some noise in the run game where Dylan Gabriel doesn't have to be the only guy that wins the game for you? And then just back to the same old stuff, which defense can stop the run? Running the football has always been important to Oklahoma. It's really always been important to Texas. There's been times where Texas just hasn't been good at it. But I think under Steve Sarkisian, they want to run the ball. They want to do it well. They did a lot of that towards the end of the season last year. You look at that KU game. You look at that Baylor game. They really just lined up and ran over the top of both of those teams. And then turnovers and field position, I think. I think it's going to be a close game. I think Texas will be a favorite more than likely. If Texas isn't the favorite in this game, then it's because something really terrible has happened. And, I think you have to look at it and think that maybe Texas's Big 12 title hopes are already out the door at that point if Texas is not the favorite in this game. And I think Texas will win this game. I think, I think that game in 2021 where they jumped out on Oklahoma and then they really just pissed down their leg and gave it right back to Oklahoma. I think that drove them to do what they did last year against Oklahoma, and I think that's something that will just continue on. I think Texas football looks at this Red River shootout differently under Steve Sarkisian than maybe they have under other teams. I think there's just a different attitude towards it. You know, we always heard from Mac Brown, it's just another game. And I know part of that was coach speak. But I think he believed it, like partly believed it, that it was just another game. And it's really not just another game. It's your biggest rivalry. Those folks hate Texas. Texas folks hate them. And Oklahoma constantly, ever since Bob Stoops showed up in Norman, Oklahoma shows up to this game with a chip on their shoulder. Like a big chip. I think Stoops was able to tap in big time into the, well, first of all, I'm going to come and I'm going to get all these recruits out of Texas that Texas didn't want. And then I'm going to go beat Texas with all these recruits that Texas didn't want. And then I'm going to start to win recruiting battles against Texas with players that Texas does want. But I'm going to still figure out a way to get all these Texas kids with a chip on their shoulder pissed off about this game, like how somehow they've been disrespected or estranged from Texas, whatever you want to call it. He's played that mental game, and he's had his teams ready to play all the time. And I think if you look at the Lincoln Riley era, there was a little bit of that, but I think some of that went away. And I don't know. I'm sure Brent Venables is trying to play that game because he was there with Stoops. But I don't know if he's got it down. We'll find out real quick. I know one thing. OU is not going to come into this game and lay down for Texas. I think you look at their rosters, Texas has clearly got the most talented roster, but that's happened before as well in this series, and they've gone out and just completely laid eggs. I think Texas will get it done this year. I think Texas will have a 2-game streak against Oklahoma after week 6. What's up with this Iowa State and Iowa gambling bullcrap? So I don't know if you guys have ever been through Iowa. I had the opportunity to drive through Iowa a few years ago on business, and there's nothing there but corn. So I get why they would want to argue. I mean, it's like cornfield after cornfield. So they got to do something. You can only play in the cornfield so long. You can only practice football for so long. You can only pretend to go to school for so long. So I guess gambling's the thing up in Iowa that kids do. Iowa State quarterback Hunter Deckers allegedly bet on ISU football games, Iowa State football games in 2021, and allegedly tampered with records related to the investigation, which sounds really bad. Deckers isn't the only one on the Iowa State football team that's been charged with these allegations. I guess you'd call them crimes if they've been charged. But he's obviously the quarterback. He's the one that everybody's going to talk about. So that comes out, and then shortly after that, a video winds up on Twitter of him drinking. I don't know where they're at. You can't really tell in the video, or at least I can't really tell in the video. But he's making a bet with a woman, $500 that Iowa State's going to beat her team. And I have no idea who her team was. I don't know if you could ascertain that from the video or not. And at the end of this video, he says, "Hey, don't post this because it's pretty much illegal." So not only is this dipshit gambling on games, but he's knowingly doing something that he knows is like 100% wrong, which I'm not going to judge for that. We do that all the time. We're humans. But, man, can you think of a dumber thing to do as a college football player than bet on your own team? Then you got Iowa kicker Aaron Blom, who allegedly wagered on Iowa games in 2021. Had quite a few wagers under his mother's name on DraftKings. So I guess he opened himself an account under his mother's name and says, I'm going to gamble on sports here. And then there was an Iowa basketball player. I think he's an ex-basketball player. I don't think he's currently with Iowa. Aaron Eulis. He's betting on Iowa basketball games, and he's betting thousands of dollars through FanDuel on other sports and other games. So here's the deal with this gambling mess. Like, I don't think there's anything wrong with guys saying, I want to gamble on sports. I think it can make the games more exciting. I think it just makes for a better Saturday. If you're gambling on college football and you pick a few games and you say, I want to pick a few of these games and I'm going to throw down 20, 30, 40 bucks, whatever it is, whatever you can afford, right? You just pay attention to those games and you get excited about those games, and you get pissed off when you don't win the bet, right? Some crazy play happens and messes up the spread for you, messes up the bet for you. You get pissed off, or crazy play happens and you win. You get excited, right? There's like a huge adrenaline rush with that. And again, I don't think inherently there's anything wrong with that. But kids, college football players, college basketball players, if you get caught gambling, it's going to be bad. If you get caught gambling and you're gambling on your own team, that's like a whole other can of worms. You're looking at conflict of interest. I mean, just don't do that. Don't ever bet on your own team, and don't get on videos. Like, don't trust people. This moron trusted that lady wasn't going to post that video, and she probably didn't for a while. I have no idea when that bet got. I mean, I'm assuming it was last season or at some point in this offseason. I don't even know if you can tell which game they're betting on. You just got to be smarter than that. That's a huge deal for this Deckers guy. I mean, he's a starting quarterback at Iowa State. He's probably, I don't know how. I don't have anything to bounce this off of. I have no idea if this is like a you don't get to play anymore thing or how that works. But it sounds bad. But who knows, man? You can bring a gun to like a shootout and watch people get murdered and run away from that. And as long as you're good at basketball and you're at Alabama, you don't get anything. You don't even get suspended for a game. So I don't know what's going to happen. I would think Deckers is probably done. It'll be interesting to see what Matt Campbell does. Matt Campbell's always building that 5-star culture up there at Iowa State. You would think part of that is having having the character enough to bench your starting quarterback and say you're not playing until all this stuff gets figured out. And I have not heard that he's suspended at this point, but I would expect that happens. Conference realignment has gone off the deep end yesterday and today. It's been off the deep end a little bit since Colorado said they're moving to the Big 12. As soon as that happened, of course there's rumors, and a lot of those rumors had some validity. A lot of those rumors were just fans talking, oh, it'd be cool if this team came, whatever. But the early talk, once Colorado and all of that was official, the early talk was Arizona and Utah are going to wind up in the Big 12. Funny thing was the Utah fans just absolutely, at least on Twitter, I can't speak for all, I won't speak for all fans, obviously, and I won't speak for all Utah fans, but there were a lot of Utah fans on Twitter that just seemed to kind of turn their noses up at the Big 12. Like, yeah, we're better than the Big 12, and it didn't endear themselves to a lot of fans of Big 12 teams. Then the Big 12 meets, approves Arizona. They say we'll allow them to apply for the Big 12. Then Arizona Board of Regents meet, and they say, yep, we're going to the Big 12. right around that same time, you got Oregon and Washington that don't want the Big 12, but the Big 10 doesn't want them. Then all of a sudden the Big 10 does want them, but wants them for a smaller revenue share. So that turns Oregon and Washington off a little bit. And then you start getting Arizona State to Big 12 rumors. Arizona State at this point seems on board. And this is yesterday. Arizona State seems on board with joining Arizona, coming to the Big 12. And then I guess the Pac-12 wakes up from like a 5-year nap and says, oh, man, we're about to lose our conference. Like, we're not going to be a conference anymore if we don't figure something out. So they wake up yesterday and say, hey, we're going to have this big meeting tonight. That's last night. And Friday morning, we're going to sign our grant of rights, and it's going to be a great deal, and we're going to keep the Pac-12 together. And so at this point, Arizona State, who has been, I feel like, almost lobbying to get to the Big 12 with Arizona, they kind of put the hold on, put the brakes on about moving to the Big 12. It's really the president at Arizona State, and he keeps talking about not letting the the Pac-12 fold up. It's like a 100-year-old conference, maybe over a 100-year-old conference. A lot of history, right? So I get that. So after this Thursday night meeting with Pac-12 officials, it looks like the Pac-12 is going to survive. You got Oregon and Washington still in. You got Arizona State that's slow rolling the whole thing. Arizona at this point is done. They're going to the Big 12 no matter what, apparently. So really, we come into Friday morning today and we're talking about can the Pac-12 get this grant of rights thing signed? And they can't. I don't know all the specifics behind that. I don't know what held it up, but it doesn't get signed. And so now Oregon and Washington are bound for the Big 10. Arizona State, and Utah seem to be bound for the Big 12. And then you got the funniest thing about all this, you got Cal and Stanford who have just been kind of sitting on the sideline, completely oblivious, or just riding it out because they're powerless. They're like a rowboat in a hurricane, right? They like nobody from Stanford or Cal has said a word. As the Pac-12 has been deteriorating from underneath them since USC and UCLA announced they were headed to the Big Ten last year. The Pac-12 has been on like life support, and now you got all these teams jockeying to jump ship, and Cal and Stanford are just chilling. And I don't know what to make of that. That's probably the most interesting thing to me about this whole deal. Is what are Cal and Stanford going to do? And do they even care? I don't know. Little Texas Longhorn offseason news. Opening of fall camp pressers went down on, day was that? Tuesday, I believe. And I thought there was a lot of interesting points that were made by the coaches in those pressers. And I'll talk a little bit about these things, give my thoughts. And one of the first things Steve Sarkisian said in that presser was there's going to be a fierce competition across all position groups. And I thought to myself, well, there should be, right? But I thought the interesting part was his follow-on statement that he finally has the roster to do that. So when they got there, late 2020, headed into the 2021 season, he had to let a lot of guys go that just weren't bought in. And then he had to let a lot more go after the 2021 season that didn't buy in. So Steve Sarkisian's really turned this roster over. And the roster, again, everybody likes to talk about Texas always having really high recruiting classes and all this talent and never doing anything with it. And again, that's a fair statement on the surface. But if you really look at these rosters, they weren't built to win. They didn't have offensive line. They didn't have defensive line. Not a lot of depth there at all. not a lot of star players got developed out of those groups. We're starting to see that now with Steve Sarkisian and his coaching staff. So they do finally have the rock. They finally have a rock. And he even said it. He said there is not a lot of difference today between our ones and twos, which is something you have not been able to say about Texas in a very long time. Sark talked about the staff needing to be better late in games. So he realizes they have a problem, which is good. I'm glad he realizes they have a problem. In 2021, it was absolutely disgusting how many games they had the lead late and lost. 5 in a row. 5 games in a row they had big leads in Big 12 play and lost games. And then last season, we saw it happen twice. Texas Tech, Oklahoma State, where they had big leads and lost those leads and went on to lose the games. But we saw them in other games have leads that sort of deteriorated. That Kansas State game was a really good example. Big lead in that game that just eroded. So he realizes they've got some things to work on there. He seems to be very analytical. Like they look at a lot of analytics. He's got a lot of guys on the staff. And I think all big-time football programs today have a lot of guys on staff that just analyze data. So I think they found trends there. Let's see what they do to fix it. Sark says he's really done a lot of work, and the team has really bought into the culture that they're trying to build. And in a lot of cases, they've built the culture, the team, the players. I think that's important. Culture can beat talent, he says. So you can take a team that's got and you see this a lot. I think Kansas State, we talked about Kansas State a couple of weeks ago. We just talked about how they battled back against Texas at home after Texas had a pretty decent lead in that game last season. I think Kansas State's the perfect example of culture beating talent. Kansas State has never had a very talented roster, but they've always had a really good culture. I think Iowa State's another example when they were actually good for a season, couple of seasons. Talent and culture is tough to beat, says Sark, and I agree with him 100%, and that roster is absolutely talented. We've yet to see if the culture has completely swung the direction it needs to go. I think you can obviously say that the culture is on the right trajectory to be a winning program in the first 2 years of Steve Sarkisian. This is a big year for him. And one of the interesting things that one of the assistant coaches talked about Steve Sarkisian was his connection with the players. He thought the culture was the way it was today because Steve Sarkisian does such a great job connecting with every single player on that team. I think that's important. I'm glad to see, and this is what I really like about Sark. He gets all of these types of things. There's a lot of people that see the job of coaching as just go coach, right? If I'm smart enough, if we game plan right, if we teach these guys fundamentals right, we'll just go out and be successful. And a lot of it is that. But I think a lot of people just skip right over the relationship piece of any organization. Man, I'm almost 46 years old, and those types of things, and it's probably because of my background, but those types of things have been things that I haven't paid a lot of close attention to until now, till recently in my career. The relationships matter, and Sark's doing that. I think the other thing Sark said, and this is the one that I really hope is legit, is we need to embrace the hate. We need to realize that we're the University of Texas. All these other schools hate us. All these other schools are going to give us their absolute. There is nothing like beating the University of Texas for all of these schools in the Big 12. They could, I mean, with the exception of Oklahoma, maybe Oklahoma State. There's not a bigger thing these schools can do than beat Texas. They get wild for it. And I think it took a while for Steve Sarkisian to realize that. And I think part of that is part of the reason why they haven't been able to finish games. The staff just didn't get it. I think the staff gets it now, and I think when the staff gets it, the players start to get it. And I think that whole program gets it now. It does not matter who these teams are. They're going to come in here, they're going to play hard, or they're going to play hard at their place, and all they care about is beating you. Embrace that and go punch them in the mouth. He even said it. We need to attack them before they attack us. So I like that. I like that thought process. I think that was all good stuff by Steve Sarkisian in his opening presser for the season. A couple other notes. Kyle Flood thinks he's got 8 guys on the offensive line that can go play, that he can interchange. You got the 5 guys that started last year, and you got Neto, Omi Ozulu, Cam Williams, and DJ Campbell are all guys that he thinks could start on that offensive line. So I expect there'll be some competition there, and it'll be interesting to see how all that plays out. A lot of people think DJ Campbell's going to sort of usurp the right guard position from Cole Hudson. And there's some people that think maybe Cole Hudson jumps over and bumps Jake Majors out of the center position. I don't know. One interesting thing Kyle Flood did say, though, someone asked him, how close are you to 10? Because 10 is ideal. That's what Kyle Flood says. And it makes sense. You would like to have a 2 deep of offensive linemen that you can rotate through, and you're not going to have a drop-off, right? He said we're not close at all to having 10. So there's a lot of the younger guys that have come in the last couple of classes that are still trying to develop, still trying to get there. He did say that versatility is the strength of his offensive line. He can move guys to a lot of different positions. I think that's important, especially when you start talking about getting late into the season, bodies start to break down, you start to maybe get some injuries. It's important to be able to, I think the interior 3 should all be able to play those 3 positions. And then tackles should be able to bounce back and forth between right and left tackle with no problems. So far in camp, who knows? They don't let the media in there for a long time. I think the media gets to be present for maybe 15, 30 minutes generally. But after day 1, Steve Sarkisian raved about the passing game, the quarterbacks, especially Quinn Ewers. Said it was probably the best practice or one of the best practices he's ever had at Texas, which isn't a whole lot. I mean, this guy's just going into his second year at Texas. I think a lot of people forget that. It's easy to look past all of that stuff and just look at his talent and look at what the NFL thinks about him. I mean, the NFL is already calling this guy a number 1 first-round draft pick. Maybe not a number 1 draft pick, but a first-round guy. He hasn't really done anything. I mean, he started, 5 games last season? 6, 7 games last season? Had some really good ones, had some really, really bad ones. I think for Quinn Ewers, the name of the game is I don't have to win the game by myself. I've got so much talent around me. I've got a good offensive line that can protect me, that can create space in the running game. I don't have to win this thing. And it's okay to throw the ball 5 yards to the wide open running back and let him run for 15, 20 yards. That's okay. I think last year he tried to force the ball down the field way too much. So it'll be really interesting to see from a Quinn Ewers perspective how he's matured, how he's grasped onto more of that offense and can really just be a distributor of the football. Steve Sarkisian also mentioned Nair, the wide receiver they recruited out of Wyoming last year, transfer out of Wyoming last year. He said he looks just like the player they recruited. He is 100% recovered from that ACL injury. Let's hope Let's fingers crossed that he can stay healthy. I think he's a guy. I think the season last year looks a lot different if Isaiah Nair is healthy all season. Don't know if they win. I don't know what that means. It's like hard to quantify that, but I think they win a lot of games that they lose, and I think they hit a lot of balls downfield that they didn't if Isaiah Nair is in the lineup. He's kind of my dark horse for this season. Everybody's talking about A.D. Mitchell, rightfully so. Everybody's talking about Xavier Worthy, rightfully so. You got Jordan Whittington coming back in the slot. Had a really good season last year. People think he could have like a breakout type season this year. He's got the talent. So rightfully so, people are just kind of quiet on Isaiah Nair. I think Isaiah Nair is gonna flash this year. Defense, you hear PK talk about the defense in the presser earlier in the season, right before fall camp, and he says we have got to create more turnovers. We gotta have more sacks. We got to turn those pressures into sacks. Texas leads the nation last season in pressures. Finishes, I think, top 40. I think they were like 40th in the country in sacks. They didn't finish a lot. So PK says we got to finish that, and we got to focus on creating turnovers. So Steve Sarkisian says the defense has been focusing a lot on that in fall camp to this point. And then another thing of note, C.J. Baxter, one of the running backs, the freshman running back out of Florida, number one running back in the country last year. Doesn't look like a freshman, they say. He's ready to physically go on the field and compete at a very high level. With any running back, you're looking at, can he be in the right place at the right time? Can he hold on to the football? In the passing game, is he a liability, or can we trust him? I think those are the hurdles for C.J. Baxter, besides the fact that the offensive backfield, the running back position is just absolutely loaded for Texas. Camp day 2, again, a lot of talk about the quarterbacks and the wide receivers. A.D. Mitchell and Jonte Cook get a lot of love out of day 2. Jonte Cook, man, that dude has some hands. He's the highest rated wide receiver that Texas has signed since Roy Williams. So he's not the same body type as Roy Williams, and won't have the same type of game as Roy Williams. But that's the type of talent. He's the type of talent that can jump on the field day one and have a really big impact. And I don't think Jonte Cook's going to start, because who are you going to start him over? But I'll tell you what, I bet you Jonte Cook gets in a lot of games this season, and I bet you he has a lot of catches, and he'll have a few touchdowns.